Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. Okay, so we have this distinction that she's making that, she's not the first person to come up with this. A lot of people throughout history are distinguishing between the household or the private life and the more public, area, which is seen as more important, which is seen as more truly human. This is where natural things take place, animal things take place. This is where distinctively human, rational things take place. Like, in politics, you have deliberation, right? People are supposed to ideally be figuring out what the common good is, not just their own goods. Or the marketplace, people are, engaging in rational choice behavior, trying to maximize profits or things like that. Education is supposed to be primarily intellectual. And this gets tied in with male, and then this gets seen as the province of the female. So in a certain way, the private gets turned into all the extra stuff that has to happen in order for this to exist, but isn't really that important or that distinctively human. And when we're doing moral theory, we don't have to think about it that much or value it that much. We look at this stuff instead. So how does this play itself out? She says, well, first off, these are not so neatly separated. The things in this realm, excuse me, over here impact things over here. She has some examples for politics. She says, the personal is highly affected by the political power beyond it. Legislation about abortion is one example. A lot of feminists are interested in that. But here's probably a even broader issue, grading earning power of men in most generations. As it turns out, actually, there's somewhat mixed evidence about your generation and my generation. But in general, have women been earning much less than men for the same kind of work? Yeah. That's something that takes place in the marketplace, but it really affects people's homes, doesn't it? It affects their personal life. It restricts their abilities to engage in the sort of things that they'd want to. It limits potentialities. The interconnected division of labor by gender, both within and beyond the household. So you can think of traditional gender roles. Again, your generation, my generation, those things are a bit more evened out, but not completely evened out. I can tell you that your great-grandparents' generation and my grandparents' generation, the men did a lot less housework, if any, than the women did. I remember going to my uncle's house once to stay with him for a week, and when I went to use the stove, because I cook, turned out he didn't even have it hooked up to the gas line. And I said, what's wrong with this? And he said, I never use it. And I opened up the refrigerator, it was all TV dinners. And he had a microwave. He never learned how to cook. You know why he never learned how to cook? Because he never had to cook. Because he was never expected to cook, because his mom or whoever, whatever woman was around was taking care of that. So these things affect each other quite a bit. The marketplace affects the household, the political system affects the household, education even affects the household. She goes on and she talks about what goes on in the household. And the things that she's focused on the most, she doesn't talk much about, say, cooking or cleaning or watching TV or what else do we do in households? Cuddling up with the dogs, or playing games, or stuff like that. What does she focus on the most? Mothering. And she talks about two main things. She talks about childbearing itself, and then she talks about child raising. And I want to read you something that she's saying here about that. She says, it was on page 335, dominant patterns of thought have seen women as primarily mothers and mothering as the performance of a primarily biological function, which means that if you're a mother, you're just doing something that's instinctual. It's not something that you have to make a choice about, that is fulfilling you as a human being, as a rational human being. It's something that is just, part of your organic nature. So it's been supposed that while engaging in political life, the things over here, or going off to work or something like that, is a specifically human activity. Women are engaged in an activity which is not specifically human. Why not? Well, because, don't cats have kittens, and dogs have puppies, and mice have little mice, whatever they're called. And even birds, have little chicks. Yeah, there you go, thanks. And reptiles, at least, they lay the eggs, and they kind of sit on them for a while. Sometimes they'll eat their young, but, as we go further down, there's less and less care about it, isn't there? But mammals in general take care of their young, don't they? So it's more of a just animal activity and not really a distinctively human activity. That's the view that she wants to attack here. She's saying that's a misguided way of looking at things. So she says, human mothering is an extremely different activity from mothering engaged in by other animals. What do you think? Does that make sense? Why would that be the case? How many of you have had pets, like a dog or a cat that had babies? It's probably, if you did, it was probably a cat, right? Because they forget to spay them and then they come back. Yeah. What do? They nurse them, right? What else do they do with the babies? Keep them warm. They take care of them. So they're providing food, warmth. Yeah.
They're very protective of them. They don't want people or anything going to near them.
Yeah, or their cats too. Tomcats will try to kill the kittens. And they'll fight with a tomcat to scare it away. So shelter, protection, food, warmth. Anything else they're providing it with? Do they love their kittens? Do you think they do?
It's hard to say. I've seen cats walk away from the kittens,
Yeah.
They'll abandon them.
I lived in a trailer park for a while when I was a grad student, and there were a lot of stray cats. And there was a mom cat whose kittens nursed way too long, because there were 5 of them, and they would knock her down. And one of them would hold her down while the other ones would nurse. And of course she started getting weaker and weaker and weaker, because you're losing sustenance. And of course they got getting stronger and stronger and stronger, until one day she ran away because she was trying to save her cat life. Now I don't think the babies were like, yeah, let's kill mom. But they were following biological instincts, right? What are some of the things that mom cats do that are, we might think are loving towards their kittens? Yeah. Yeah, they clean them all the time, and then cats clean each other when they get older. When a cat likes you and it does the milk dance thing, that's imitating itself being a kitten. You're like its mom. Yeah, and then they start getting their claws into you. So there's a lot of biological things. And is there affection there? I think, you could say there's something like affection. Now, is that like human affection for a child? What do you think? No. And put aside moms who don't actually seem to like their kids. There's plenty of them out there. She's not talking about that so much, yeah.
No, because in a way they don't form the attachment that humans do.
Yes.
They hit a point where the cats, they're going to get rid of their kittens.
Yes.
You have one cat, and you don't have your mother.
You might do that with your kids too,
What?
You might do that with your kids when they turn 18,
Well, then they didn't form secure attachment as a child.
Yeah. Because you'll call them up and see how they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're right. there's a lifelong bond that takes place. Again, if the relationship is good. Some kids are like, as soon as I'm 18, I'm out of here, I'm never going to see you again.
Most of them say that in the best. Especially, well, at least
Yeah.
kids in my town, I find.
Yeah, I was kind of along those lines myself, so I can understand that. She says in here, the work and speech of men is recognized as very different from what might be thought of as the work and speech of other animals. Human mothering is fully as different from animal mothering. How so? She says human mothering does some very important things. It shapes language and culture. It forms human social personhood, and it develops morality. That's worth sort of dwelling on. If there's anything to underline in that section, that's probably it. Human mothering shapes language and culture. Where do you actually learn language from? You learn it first in the home. Where do you first acquire what we call culture? In the home. I know, if you're an orphan, okay, in the orphanage, but generally it's in some sort of home environment. There's a reason why we call something a mother tongue, or in French, literally the mother language. It's because most people learn it from interacting with their mother and probably also their father, right? That's an important thing. The cats actually have to learn how to meow from their mom. That's hardwired. There are some things that they have to learn. How to kill mice. Believe it or not, cats that don't learn how to hunt and kill properly, they will play with a mouse for a long time, but they have no idea how to break its neck and kill it, and then eat it. But they can also learn that from a male cat. I had a kitten that learned from a male cat how to hunt and kill and that sort of stuff too. So there are some things that they learn, but think about just how much a human baby has to learn, and how much of that is dependent on somebody caring about it and being patient with it. Because human babies are totally independent of almost everything from the start, and even when they start developing motor skills, parents think it's really miraculous. Oh my God, he's taking the first steps, but those are not great steps. It's not like a deer with within a day the little fawn can run around. With us, it takes like a year before the kid can even get itself up and start to get on 2 feet, and it takes a long time before the kid is anything but wobbly. So somebody actually has to care about that kid and encourage it, and keep trying, right? That's what human mothering or nurturing does. Forms human social personhood. Going back to that conception of attachment. There's a basic level of attachment that has to take place in order for a human being to be able to relate to anybody. Generally, that takes place between the child and the parent. It can happen with other people, but if attachment disorder, what psychologists call it, takes place, that kid is going to have very bad outcomes in general, because it's such a massive meta-complex that affects everything else. So socialization takes place in the household. It doesn't take place primarily in the marketplace or in the schools or out in politics. Babies aren't participating in politics, are they? Kids aren't. What else? Develops morality. The home is the first school for moral life, isn't it? When kids, turn out screwed up, there is something to looking at the parents. And not to say that the parents are entirely to blame, but there is something that's supposed to happen within the home, isn't there? If you have somebody who's a sadist, are they going to raise a kid who's well-adjusted? Probably not, because they're not supplying something that kid absolutely needs in order to develop right. So she goes on and she says, human mothering can be as fully a creative activity as those activities traditionally thought of as distinctively human. What are some of those? Again, economic activity, intellectual activity, artistic production. Why? Because what does human nurturing do? It creates new persons and new types of persons. That's just as creative as making new objects or products or institutions. It's kind of an interesting thing to think about. So she says there's no reason to think of, for example, human nursing as any more simply biological than there is to think of, say, a businessman going out with colleagues that way. It's all cultural. It's culturally imbued. It has a natural basis, but it's something that is imbued with culture and passes on culture. So she says actually moral theory should concern itself first of all with the activity of creating new persons and look at that very carefully. And is she right in saying that maybe Kant and Bentham, maybe even Aristotle haven't looked at this as carefully as they should have? I think she is right. She says we have to look at what its norms and practices ought to be and with how the institutions and arrangement throughout society and the world ought to be structured to facilitate the right kind of development of the best kinds of new persons. And here's another sort of lapidary sentence of hers. The flourishing of children ought to be at the very center of moral and social and political and economic and legal thought. So that's a pretty revolutionary thing to say, isn't it? The flourishing of children, rather than say gross national product, or the greatest happiness principle, or doing duty for its own sake. The flourishing of children ought to be the main thing that we look at in moral theory. That would be quite a change, wouldn't it? So that would require a very different understanding of the relationship between the private or the personal and the public. The private or the personal would then become much more important. And again, who are we learning this lesson from? Are there a lot of male theorists, advancing these claims? In historical terms, no. It's been mainly women doing it, and that's why this is identified with feminist scholarship.